You can do it. You can do it, YouTube. Alright. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Tuesday live stream. We're going to let some folks get in as we start going. I got a short topic today just based on some kind of observations in my own fish room. And it prompted me to think about something mostly over the weekend while I was doing a little bit of maintenance while being busy out of my mind like usual. But I was literally so busy at work the last 2 days that I didn't get to pre-set up all the stream stuff. So that was kind of done on the fly, half an hour before the stream was supposed to go live. So it kind of gives you a look into my world right now. It's just even setting up the stream, I had to do kind of on the fly. So yeah. So I want to talk about why fish hide. And this isn't going to be super scientific or anything crazy. This is going to be based on an observation that I've had with my own fish. Now, we're going to be talking about rainbow fish specifically, but it applies to a lot of species of fish. So I want to give you two, let's call them case studies. I mean, this is not accurate to what a true case study is, but let's consider them like that for a second. You've got two different fish. One is 15 fish in a species that all school together. These are my centaniensis, right? And then the second is Chilathrina blaheri, and there's 12 of those fish. So the numbers aren't really super different. It's 3 different, but once you get over 6 rainbows, you're kind of safe. Tight schooling behavior is generally going to happen if they're stressed. So with that being said, one set of fish, the centaniensis, go into a fresh tank. They're on their own. They have plants, including a really massive Java fern to hide behind and hide around. The blaheri go into a well-planted tank, but there's not a lot of stuff to hide behind. It's all kind of open. There's ground level stuff, and there's some stuff that's surface level, but where they're swimming is all very open. Now, the caveat here is none of these are going through perfect quarantine. They were done by Dan's fish. Dan takes a month to quarantine his fish, lots of medicines. I trust Dan that I don't have to worry too much about doing the quarantine work because he's done it for me. His water's really similar to mine, so it's pretty simple. I can plop him in a tank, usually with other fish, and not worry about it. And this is where my case study comes into play. The blaheri go into a tank where fish already have been living. There's some corydoras. There's a few other blaheri. There's 4 females. But there are fish that have been here for a while and are comfortable and are swimming around relaxed. They're not in tight schools or doing, the hiding behavior where they try to hide in corners or hide in plants or try to scooch around sponges or obstacles to get away from you. And anytime you're on one side of the tank, they're instantly on the other. Things like that, right? This is typically what we see in stressed fish. This doesn't happen with the blaheri. Now, you could say, well, certain species of fish are more skittish than others. Yes. But I want to touch on something that's important here. We look at the centaniensis, and as Mike is mentioning, they're super skittish, right? They're constantly trying to hide, and unless there's fresh food put in the water, they're hiding in the Java fern or what have you. And my dog is barking. Yeah, you're all right. Bobolino, fierce defender of some noise in the house. Hey, relax. Lay down. I love that dog, but he's a corgi, so he barks at everything. So the difference really becomes with a high water schooler, which is something that most rainbow fish are. They're mid to top water schooler. if they're alone, there are some natural anti-predator behaviors that are going to occur. So they're going to school really tightly, they're going to stay together, and very often, if they have somewhere to hide, they're going to hide because they don't know whether a predator is in the water or not. And, shipping causes all sorts of stress, and even though they can explore the whole tank, they just don't know if a predator is nearby. They see this big scary hand come by every once in a while, and then food shows up, and that starts building a response that maybe that's not a scary thing. But in the case of the blaheri, they're in a tank where there's fish that swim below them, corydoras, and they're perfectly casual, they're out in the open, they're not hiding, and that helps tell the blaheri that there's no predators, right? So they have less stuff to hide in. Despite being in a tank with more plants, they don't have an obvious thing that they can hide behind away from me. And yet they're up front in the glass all the time. No worries whatsoever. And what this keys in on, and what I'm trying to kind of point to in my observation, case study, whatever you want to call it, is that often one of the best ways that we can help fish feel comfortable and not want to hide isn't always just like give them places to hide so that they feel like if they need to, they can hide, but they're not forced to constantly look for something. They know there's something, right? But instead, think about what predates on those fish and what tells them there's no predators in the water. And if you can give them that thing that tells them there's no predators in the water, which usually with top level fish, it's seeing fish calmly swim below them. If you have low level fish, it's having fish above them, right? So like corydoras, if they're being super shy and you put a school of tetras in above them and those tetras are relaxed or swimming all over the place, you're more likely to see the cories out and about. And certain cories are more skittish or hidey than others. That's going to happen. But if they know, hey, this other fish that's not a predator because it's smaller than me or the same size as me is swimming about and they don't mind, there's probably no predators nearby. Just like for those upper water fish, well, hey, those little fish below me, they seem to be fine. It's probably not a predator around here. I can be more relaxed. So it's a simple topic, and we've had some people mention some stuff in chat, kind of like, let me give an example here. Like if you don't have enough cover, or there's too small a school in the case of schooling fish, they're going to hide a lot more. So numbers can play a game too. In my case study, because there's like 15 and 12 of a fish, it kind of gets rid of the numbers game, just because most of the time when we have issues where people have too few fish, it's because they're dealing with like 3 or 4 or the Noah's Ark style tank where it's like, I want 2 of this and I want 2 of that and I want 2 of that. Most of us serious hobbyists don't do that, but there are still people who do that, and then they'll wonder why they don't see that fish very often. It's because it's a schooling fish and they have 2 of them, right? So when you start getting numbers like 12 and 15 of a fish, typically, unless we're in a very large tank with a very small fish, that's not an issue. Now, if you were, say, a 40-gallon breeder, which is what I'm using for my Centoniensis, and then I have the 75-gallon long, which is where the blaheri are. So these are bigger tanks, but they're bigger fish, so they need that more room. The question is, would the Centoniensis change their behavior and become more comfortable? Because they're still a little skittish when I come near the tank, unless there's food in the water. And then they're very happy to be out and about picking off food. Would that behavior change if I put other fish in the water to help show them they don't need to worry about predators? So that's actually an experiment I'm intending to try soon. There's some one species of other rainbow that I have that I want to get into a slightly larger tank and just see if I can get them to color up a little more and be kind of pretty for camera. Had a random work phone call. So mine, what I will say is that, like, so Mike's mentioning here, he put his Centoniensis, we're talking about the same fish now, which, Mike, tell me how many you have, I'm curious, in a 20 long for about 3 months. They never spawned or chilled out. They finally got, he finally got annoyed at them and put them into a grow-out tank with about 50 other rainbow fish, and now they're fine. So, there you go, right? Stressed. Mine are in a 40-gallon breeder. There's 15 of them. They're all about, I'd say 2.5 inches in size. They're still young, but they're definitely spawning size. And I will see them color up. I will see the males turn on what I like to call their headlamp. I can't remember the actual technical term for when their breeding stripe that the males do. I just like calling it a headlamp because it's funny to me. I'll see that behavior, but I've never like had the time to sit long enough to see if any actual spawning and full courting happens. Like, most rainbows will color up during morning food and when light first comes on if they're a morning type fish, regardless of whether they actually end up courting, because rainbows are simple and dumb like that. But so I have 2 different groups of fish that I've been thinking about putting in there. So it's one of those things where it's like I'm tempted to put in, like, either my Running River rainbows or my Melititania Iwer, which are a small fish, to see, because they're very comfortable, they're used to me. They're in even smaller tanks and I don't see them hide at all. So I'm wondering if I move them to a bigger tank, if it will just help them just have more relaxed behavior, right? And open up a small tank to potentially put some baby fish in or try to spawn something. But I've also, the other problem I have is that I've heard you can breed the Centoniensis and they won't predate on their spawn too much. So I've been tempted to let that sit for a little bit. But the thing I'm most curious about really comes down to, can I get that group to chill out and be more relaxed and think there's no predators if I put some other fish in there? So maybe I need to put in like a pleco or something, I don't know. Some kind of low-lying fish that sits under them on the substrate. Maybe that will help them chill. Because I've seen it in the Blaharii tank. They're so relaxed. And I've seen like Blaharii losing their minds before. Like, they were more stressed in the bags than the Centoniensis were. They were way more active and jittery when they were going through their acclimation. They really, really wanted out really bad. But once they were out, within 5 minutes, they were calm, swimming around, and even coloring up and trying to, like, to spawn with a female. In one case, one guy. But that's just kind of my little talk. I'd love if folks have comments like, you know, I've had this issue with my fish hiding or something like that. Feel free to put those in the comments in chat today. We'll talk about that. We'll open it up for the usual kind of questions and answers. As always, the easiest thing is to do at Bentley Pasco. It makes sure that I can see it really easily. If you have any questions, it doesn't have to be about just a topic. It can be about anything fish related, and I will do my best to answer it. We're having a nice jovial chat of folks saying hi to each other, so that's always wonderful to see. But while I wait for some questions, 'cause I answered about pre-stream. Actually, there's one that I answered, but I would like to talk about it for just a half sec. So I want to scroll up because I want to give this person a little credit because it's a good question. So Neeson asked if you could elaborate about using grape leaves for iron. So if, for those of you who are wondering like where this comes from, in a video I did in the Plants for Profit series about crypts, I talked about like a super secret thing about crypts that I know and have learned from some of my crypt gurus here in the greater Seattle area. And most of this comes down to how they grow crypts when it comes to immersed growth. So we're typically looking at, not fully submerged crypts. This is where these people are growing like the super rare, super expensive crypts. stuff that's been like collected once and only once. Really, really crazy stuff like that, right? So grape leaves are used very commonly in these setups down in the substrate. And what you'll do is like you'll buy your grape leaves. You'll make sure that you've rinsed them from whatever, because most of the time they're in a liquid when you get them. You'll buy them in jars for like Mediterranean cooking. You'll dry them out and then you'll shred them up a little bit and put them down toward the roots of the crypts. And the reason why we use grape leaves is because grape leaves naturally are very rich in iron. All crypts, regardless of color, are kind of iron hogs. So when you can put something that is rich in iron, especially a decaying material, which is going to produce a little bit of ammonia, a little bit of nitrite, a little bit of nitrate, all those things that plants love, on top of being a nice iron source at the root level of the crypt, it's kind of like giving it a little steroid, right? It's not quite a root tab, but it's almost doing the same function as a root tab. But we're targeting something really specific for just that species of plant, using something that's in nature that breaks down, that can be used, and has certain nutrient sources we know that those plants like. We know that they have a lot of iron. Crypts like iron. We let it break down. That iron becomes available. The crypts use the iron. Healthier crypts, right? Especially because it's right at the roots. Helps that root system establish itself even more, because it's going to really fan out when it gets all those nutrients. It's going to build a really nice root system in there, and that can help that crypt do even better. So that's the reason why I talk about grape leaves as like my kind of super secret when it comes to crypts. And there's a few others similar to that I have that I'll eventually like. They'll come into the topics of videos over time, but they're not, how do I put this? They're not something I think no one knows. They're just, I think, less common information. But you know, over time we'll talk about that kind of stuff. Like a lot of it'll be like I'm gonna show you in a setup video for a tank kind of thing. So Caswell's talking about how he's always heard that coolie loaches were super shy, but he has 3 of them and they're always out and very active. That's surprising. It's like any coolie loaches I've ever seen, like they constantly hide in little caves until nighttime, and then they're like really active nocturnal, because most loaches are kind of nocturnal. So like a great example would be like my dojo loach, Danger Noodle. As we get toward the evening, he gets super active and he'll be out and about like scrounging for food, but otherwise he's like super lazy, just laying about or hiding. He has like these faux caves where he basically like has areas behind the sponge filters that he'll just stand like straight up like this to hide and just flop there and sleep and be lazy. It's kind of funny. Michael Wentworth. So definitely not off topic, but is the lighting experiment project test bed with the Titan still happening, or did you move on to other things? No. So that's a part of test lab that is very, very intentional to get done. I still have the lights and everything. The problem that I have run into is that I ran out of space inside my house and power for extra tanks. And it's going to require 3 equal-sized tanks, which 40-gallon breeders is what I want to do, because it feels like the most relevant tank size for each of those lights without giving an unfair advantage to any one light, because there's some disadvantages to each light based on certain tank sizes. So that's kind of playing like the most equal ball game to all 3 lights. And then I have to have, filters and all that kind of stuff running for all of them, because when you do CO2, right, which all these would be high-tech tanks at that kind of rate, like a sponge filter just doesn't push enough around to make the CO2 useful. You need something with a lot more flow, whether that's a hang-on back or a canister. So the original goal was I was going to try and make some space in my garage to set up the testing lab. And, yeah, I tried to originally make space out there when my roommate was here, before he had to go back to the Minnesota area to deal with some family stuff. And it just turned out like, because of the amount of stuff that's in my garage, until it's really emptied, I can't make the space. I'd have to tear down a bunch of tanks in my house that are currently housing fish in order to get that set up somewhere else. So it got a really long hold. And basically my goal is like once I can get to the point of where my garage is empty and I can start turning it into a fish room, I will have a dedicated area inside there for testing lab so that we can do all the experiments I really plan on doing. So budget lights, high tech lights, comparing, filters, substrates, all sorts of stuff, like letting people see kind of scientific approaches to testing things where you kind of get to make your own decision because you can just watch what happens if everything else is set the same and the only parameter is that one thing, like 3 different lights or 3 different filters, whatever it may be, and kind of make your own determination as to which one matters the most, right? So not moved past, but limitations of my terribly wired house is really what it comes down to. Like, there is space in my house to set up 3 tanks, but the way that my house is wired, I will blow circuits if I put them in the only places where there is space for them. And that's not good. This is just not good at all. My house, despite being built in the 80s, was like wired by complete idiots. So they have way too many things wired together on too small a circuit if you're an aquarist. If you're not an aquarist and you're just like a normal human being, they're perfectly fine. But yeah, it will be fun. It's just one of those things where like, yeah, it is a... I actually talked to Corey of Aquarium Co-op about it because I wanted some of his insight, because he's been doing this kind of stuff for a long time. And he basically said, like, you will undoubtedly spend far more money than you will ever make making those videos. Like, even at a channel his size, it would probably be more expensive to do that kind of project than the revenue those videos would bring in. But if you enjoy it, you don't care about that, right? And if it's something you could afford naturally, it probably doesn't matter so much. So it will be kind of a money pit, but it'll be a fun money pit. It's really what it comes down to. It'll be a money pit, but it'll be a fun money pit. Cancerfish got some surprise bristlenose eggs. That's pretty dope. I need to like make things go faster, which basically means I need human malware to go away, so I can have have certain things happen. Cause like there's a specific species of pleco I want to get back in my house, and I need room to do so. But breeding them will be super fun. Okay, Mike, let me see here. My tank I had, the Centenniensis, has been painted black on the back, sides, and bottom. So I'm going to try them again in a few weeks and see what happens. Might lose the main... Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's the problem with only having a small group, is sometimes you get a lone male or a lone female, and you get really paranoid about losing anything. What you could try is... I mean, moving them shouldn't be too bad. I don't think they get too stressed as long as, like, they have... You black out the sides and back, and they kind of have that cave going on. It usually calms them down. But, yeah. Man, the few Centenniensis that have been going up lately on Aquabit have going some insane numbers. There's the few rainbow fish that are up right now, like, that are kind of rare. The pricing on them is mind-boggling. And there's one that, like, there's no bids on it. But the base, like, bid for, was like 6 fish is like $350 or some nonsense like that. It's like, whoo, good lord. That's a little much. I don't care how rare it is. That's too much. Like, there are other people that have that fish. I don't think it's quite that rare. Okay, so Stephen P. Do you ever test your water for phosphates? My tap water shows 2 ppm, and it's the same in all my tanks. Even the one running Seachem Phosguard. What gives? So, I don't really test for phosphates, and part of that is because there's, like, nothing in my water. Seattle water, there's actually this, like, really great Facebook post in one of my local Facebook groups, so for the Greater Seattle Aquarium Society, that details the way that the Seattle area water is pulled. And a certain time of year, the main watershed that usually accounts for like 70% of our water, which has like nothing in it, it's ever so slightly basic, but is extremely soft. There's like very little in it, and it's kind of naturally sits at about a 7.2 pH. It's really great for plants and breeding all sorts of fish. Well, at a certain time of year, that watershed starts getting to lower levels because of the summer heat, and we get a lot less rainfall. So, and these are river-based watersheds, by the way. So they start pulling a significantly larger portion of water from a different watershed, which is off the first one is the Cedar River, and the second one is the Tolt River. The Tolt River is a little acidic and has nothing in it whatsoever. So they're forced to buffer the water, which usually brings in carbonate hardness, so KH, in order to protect the pipes from getting messed with. And when they do that, I can always tell because there'll be a time in the summer every year. It's happened every year, not always at the same time, but you can tell when it's happening, and I'll get algae blooms. And I'll start seeing hair algae pop up when I'm doing nothing different in my tanks. And that's usually when I'm like, oh, they switched the water supply over. It's because I figured it out a couple of years ago, and I got like a massive water report from my water company. And it was like, oh, yeah, so we flush the system out at the same time that we start pulling more water from this other watershed because the supply levels are getting slightly low on the main watershed, and we don't want to risk it. We don't want to risk doing damage to it. It's like, okay. So I end up with like extra carbon hardness in the not phosphates. Now, phosphate is a little different. I'm guessing you're on, if you're not on a well, you're probably on like what, Midwest water or something like that, where it's just naturally like got lots of minerals in it to begin with. But even with PhosGuard, you're at 2 ppm. I mean, the only thing I can think of is that like the PhosGuard is kind of run its course because it can only handle so much, and every time you're doing a water change, you're just adding more phosphates back into the water. Realistically, like the way that you fight that is by doing one of those whole house water filters, which is like a carbon block filter. Okay, Baton Rouge water. Sure. But so you have 2 ppm phosphate, but you're seeing phosphate deficiency in your plants? Huh. So I would almost be curious if you're actually dealing with a different deficiency that is showing itself as phosphate deficiency. Because if you have phosphates naturally in the water, you shouldn't have a deficiency issue. Especially if you're using like an all-in-one fertilizer that has small amounts of it anyway. Plus you're going to get extra phosphates from your food. I mean, the only other option would be like dose slightly more phosphate and see what happens. But it is a little strange that like you naturally have phosphates, and it could possibly be that like the kit is like all the API test kits, the liquid test kits, they're great, but they can report a little funky if they're not relatively fresh, or if you don't like really shake the bejesus out of them. I mean, I'm talking like the way a paint mixer shakes a paint can, and doing that for several minutes, because even though like you'd think like I'm going to shake like this for 20 seconds or so and that should mix it pretty well, they for some reason really need you to like just mix the heck out of it for it to work correctly. It's strange though. It's really strange. I mean, you're welcome to shoot me some pictures and I can try and help out, but I mean, usually based on what you're describing, that does sound like a phosphate deficiency, but it might be something else that's presenting itself that way because you're only getting so far into it. I don't know. All right. Man, I actually don't know how to pronounce. I mean, I know how to pronounce the last name is Singh, but I'm not sure how to pronounce that first name. Usually, I'm decent with a lot of like Indian culture names, just because I work in tech, so you get exposed to them a lot. But we'll answer your question regardless. Mr. Singh, I'm guessing. Do you know why my Ludwigia inclinata red and Rotala Ceylon pink are not turning red? I've got two Nycrew Classic LED Planet Plus. Those are the only two lights I keep after downsizing. It's a 29-gallon tank with stratum, dosing easy green 2 times a week. I just want to make sure there's not something extra in here in the chat. So my first question to you is going to be, are you doing CO2? In the case of Ceylon Pink and Inclinata Red, without CO2, they tend to not show their red very much because they won't absorb enough of the other nutrients and go through a really heavy photosynthetic period in order to get the extra coloration to occur. Now, the other way that we can do this is by causing nitrate deficiencies, which is done using like the lean EI dosing method, which Green Aqua has probably the best video that explains how to do that, and why you would do that kind of fertilizing method, which it's pretty recent. Like their most recent fertilizer video will tell you that. But typically this is because you're not running CO2. For some of those red and kind of pink plants, in order to see those colors, they basically have to have CO2 in the water. They don't need a ton, but they need some. So an example would be in your 29-gallon tank. If you did your CO2 at 2 bubbles a second, which is not a lot of CO2, it'd probably give you 20-ish parts per million CO2, which is plenty safe. Like usually most people try to target about 30 parts per million. That should be enough, sufficient to get that kind of color. Now, if you are running CO2, you might be running into an issue where you're running your lights too long, and they're getting the CO2 might be getting too lean, so that they're not able to maximize that photosynthetic period while the CO2 is running. And then what happens is they're kind of stunting their own growth and coloration in order to do a more minimal photosynthetic cycle. It's really weird. Plants are weird, but it's hard for a non-scientific, like, I'm not a botanist, right? So I can't like super explain it in depth, but at the same time, that a lot of times you get that in depth and people's eyes start glazing over. But the basics are, usually to get that color, you need CO2. Because I've had Inclinata and I've had specifically the Ceylon Pink, and if I've tried it in tanks without CO2 and tanks with CO2, and the only way I ever got the pink color out of it was having, and it's reds, because you can get it into a red form too. The only way I got those colors was by having it in a tank with CO2 and really good light, because it's a finicky plant. It likes to be difficult. EJ Fish is 76. Hey, what's up, man? Do you still have plant cultures? I remember watching some of your older videos on this. I believe it was Crips. So I don't make plant cultures. I will buy tissue cultures. Most commonly, a lot of the kind of cool Crips come in tissue cultures. So I'll start with a tissue culture and work from there. I still purchase tissue cultures every once in a while for tanks, but I haven't like set up something new or needed new plants in quite a while. I've been frankly too busy with work and some other kind of family stuff, puppies, things like that, to go quite as hog wild as I used to on plants. That'll change probably toward the end of this year, where I'll go back to more aggressively working on new plants, and you'll see probably a big uptick in like the plants for profit videos when that happens, because I'm not doing as many plants right now. It's harder to make that content because it's kind of like I have the same stuff I've had for a while lying around. So giving good, relevant new advice is a little harder because I'm not playing with new things to force those kind of situations to occur. I hope that makes sense. Whoa. Chad just jumped like crazy on me. Okay, so just to follow up with you, Steven, I mean, it sounds like your test kit's fine if it sees distilled to 0 ppm. It's so weird that like you're 2 ppm phosphates and having issues. You shouldn't at that much, because like you really only need like 2 to 3 ppm of phosphates to be fine. Mr. Fish, sir, does low or high phosphate cause BBA? Usually high. High, so blackbeard algae or blackbrush algae, it is really, really, really advantageous of phosphates. So if you have really low phosphates, it's unlikely to have an outbreak of it. If you have excessive phosphates to where your plants can't handle it, it's really easy for that type of algae to start going gangbusters. So it's one of those things that, like, if you're high on phosphate and you push a decent amount of light, you have a strong chance to have blackbeard start showing up. Now, it's easy to get rid of blackbeard algae. You can use like the 1-2 punch method, which is a whole tank hydrogen peroxide dosing method that's on theplanettank.net. Follow that to the letter exactly. Do not briefly read it. Read that thing like 5 or 6 times before you do anything, because if you do not follow it perfectly, it can get risky fast. But if you do it perfectly, it's extremely effective. Second, man, anytime I have bad blackbeard algae, I just put some SAEs in the tank, and I just let them do what they do. And I typically like can figure out the balance in that time, and I know what I've screwed up, and then I'll put the SAEs to make it so, like, you know, they'll take 2 months or whatever to clear it all out. I'll get some little bitty guys. You know, I'll go get my favorite reticulated SAEs, and then in like 2 months there'll be these like big fat chuds that are like this long instead. But they're very happy, and the algae is gone, and that's usually all I care about. And then I move them to like one of my big tanks with my big adult fish, and just let them like grow out and be big lazy dummies out there, because I like those fish even if as they get bigger they're not as algae aggressive, but they still kind of hunt it down, unlike the standard SAE, where the standard SAE just like stops paying attention to algae once it gets past about 3 inches, because they only care about spawning at that point, and they need protein for that. All right, so yeah, you, Mr. Zane, going back to you, you gave away your CO2 when you downsized. So a lot of our red plants, it is really, really hard to get their strongest red coloration, or in the case of like the pinks and some of the oranges and stuff like that, to get that coloration without CO2. You can by doing a really careful process of causing nitrogen deficiencies, but that risks the health of a lot of other plants if you don't do it correctly. And usually to do the nitrogen deficiency, you also still need CO2. There's ways to add CO2 without having a really expensive regulator setup. However, I've found, like, you know, one good regulator, even on a smallish tank with a you know, a reasonable atomizer of some form, will last you an extremely long time, right? Like, it'll cost you like $20 to refill it, or $25 to refill it at a Central Welding or some kind of like brewery place, and that tank's gonna last you like a year or 9 months or something like that, and it just goes for a really, really long time. And it can tend to make a lot of things a lot easier, especially if you want to do those super colorful plants. Otherwise, they tend to just kind of look drab and green. Omar, I need pink flamingos in my crypt tank badly. You know what, man? The Aquarium Co-op had some potted pink flamingo a little while back, and yeah, I bought 4 pots of it just because that plant is so finicky from tissue culture to keep it happy and not have it just melt and die on you. And I've had tons of them in the past, and you know, I've had them thrive, and then the second I move them from one tank to another, they just melt and die and never come back, and it drives me up the walls, because, you know, they're expensive, but it's more that, like, I just want to keep that plant, because having that bright pink color is so weird and kind of fun as like a little highlight hiding in amongst a bunch of other things. But yeah, it's a lot of plants right now, like flamingo and stuff like that, are really, really hard to get a hold of, because a lot of the shipping's all screwed because of human malware. And, you know, companies like Co-op and stuff, they're trying constantly to order more, But often the problem is just that the farms that have them can't import them. So it's kind of a nightmare. And the same sort of happens with the Florida sunset crypt. That was really popular for a little while, and then it just seemed to disappear off the face of the planet. I have a bunch of it, in the sense of like my Florida sunset is just now starting to propagate happily. It's like it's hit that happy medium where it's sending a bunch of baby plants out. So I'm leaving it and letting it do its thing for a while until it takes over like a 15% corner of one of the tank it's in. And then once it does that, then I'll feel safe about like moving some to some friends, so that more of that plant's out there. So for some reason, like the few people that have it, they don't want to sell it. And in my case, like I had to like basically bribe someone to hold it for me for a while. It's like, okay, the next time you pull some of that plant, you have to hold it for me and not sell it to someone else. It's like, I guess. I guess. Funny the way things are, right? Oh, you work at a pet shop. That's cool. Is it like a mom and pop, or are you talking like a big box? I'd be curious. Hopefully it's like a little mom and pop. Those are the best. Mom and pop pet shops are the best. Mike. A simple red plant that you never hear much about is Barclaya longifolia. I've had 3 bulbs, and they are a neat plant. So I personally have not kept Barclaya. However, there's a few people in my club who have it, and I keep wanting to dive into the Barclayas because there's a couple of them that are really neat. The big thing is, Barclaya is not the easiest to propagate. So part of why you don't see it very often is it doesn't propagate as quickly as like some of the nymphaeas, for example. So it's kind of harder to get a lot of them going all over the place. It's a really cool plant. It's really simple. It just like kind of, you don't see, oh no, why is my brain totally... Lagonandras. You don't see a ton of Lagonandras everywhere either. And they're like a weird... they're like a weird mix of an Anubias and a crypt, right? In the way that they grow. But they typically have these like really cool, beautiful leaves. They get big. That's the reason why a lot of people don't have them, is because a lot of them get really big. And there's like, the most common ones are Lagonandra meboldies. There's the meboldii red and meboldii green. And you'll see some people that have those from tissue cultures, but like the long leaf Lagonandras, they get these like they look like absolutely enormous crypt leaves, and they'll get like, if you can, you get them like 12 and 14 inches tall. But you don't see a lot of those because that plant is not the easiest to propagate, even though it works kind of like a rhizome, but you plant it kind of like a rosette. This is really strange. Really strange plant, but really beautiful when you get it really healthy. Ah, Igor, you have expensive taste. You want blood vomit, which is an eriocolon for those who aren't familiar with the blood vomit plant. As it's such a dumb name. Some of the names that like they give some of those things are insane, but that one in particular, there's a lot of people that have that particular plant here in the Great Northwest, because our water is really, really good for that kind of plant. We have lots of soft water here. Man, Martin, you're causing some problems there, buddy. What's boring to one is exciting to others. There are plenty of people that will say that like the most exciting thing ever was a pleco tank, that they saw their pleco once in a month. Like everybody has a personal opinion. Like, all right, you don't like it, cool. I do. I don't like big African cichlids, and tons of people love them. I like looking at them. I never keep them. The only African cichlid, that's not true. 2. There's 2 African cichlid types that we keep: shell dwellers, cribs, and not even like the standard crib, not the pulcher. I like the uh, Tenianis styles because they're cool. So like the Nigerian red and all that stuff. Oh yeah, I'm sure he's a troll. Whatever. Like the thing is, I'm gonna go off fish subject for a half second here. You're like your trolls and stuff that you get in YouTube. So like I come from the gaming atmosphere where like toxic people and trolls are a norm. And like the fish community is so different. It's like there's like one or two people that you see in a chat, and like most people are really awesome, right? Where it's like the complete opposite in gaming. It's like 75% of people are jerks, and only a few people are actually really nice. And it's like people like that don't bug me. And part of it is I look like this: like if your sole mission in life is to go out and insult people, like I get an occasional comment where somebody's like, they'll insult like, your tanks are dirty. Like, that's some kind of insult. Or like you'll get somebody who like tries to take a crack at how you look or whatever, right? I let so much of that roll off my back because one, I've been forged in a fire that is way hotter than anything those people throw at me. And two, how I look at it this way, like I'm pretty fortunate. I'm a very happy person. How miserable does that person's life have to be where their joy comes from being a jerk to someone else? Like, I generally like to believe that most people are good at heart. Most people, even in the worst situation, have something deep down that tells them morally to be good, right? Not to do the shady thing. I mean, we're all going to do what we can to survive. We're humans, and deep down, we're also really nasty creatures, right? We're totally primate-brained idiots. But deep down, our societies teach us to help people, to be good to people, to treat others the way you want to be treated, right? So when I see somebody who says something dumb in chat, the only thing I think to myself is, it must be really hard to be that person. Because their one joy is to go and to treat other people terribly. Something's really got to be horrible in your life if that's where your joy comes from. It's like me, I like helping other people. That brings me joy. I've been very fortunate in my life. And a lot of it has been through hard work, right? I've been very fortunate in that I get to wake up every day, be excited about when I go to work. And yeah, I work a lot. But you know what? I'm excited in what I do. I enjoy what I do. And then sometimes I get an opportunity. I come home from work after a stressful day, which today was a stressful day. There was a lot of just problems at work. I get to come home and I get to do a live stream with wonderful people who share a crazy niche hobby with me and who want to hear like my crazy butt babble about fish and plants on the internet in front of a teeny tiny fish tank on a webcam. Like with my dog barking in the background. Like how can I not feel happy? Right? How can I not feel like somewhere, whether you think it's a blessing, a boon, however you view life, right? How can you not look at that and just feel good? Yeah, there's no way I can feel bad about that. Right? So when I see those people, because we've had some bad ones in chat before, as far as like saying some really mean and hurtful stuff. And like, to me, I can't help but feel pity for them. So like, I hope you're still listening, because know that I pity you. I'm not like, you didn't like ruin my day. You can't ruin my day. You can't. I have a group of wonderful people with me who all love fish. And we all love different fish. Like, there are obviously some people in here who are African cichlid fans. Like, what do you mean you don't like African cichlids? I like looking at them. They're pretty, but I can't keep them, man. Like, especially like peacocks and all that, and mabunas and all that. Too aggressive for my game. But we all have this unique thing that we love together. And that is like, it is so rare to have a community like the fish community in YouTube, where like one person out of 75 that are in chat right now is a jerk. 74 other people are awesome. You go to gaming or like any of the other communities on YouTube and like flip that. Because it's like, you got 75 people in chat, 50 of them are just looking to be asses in chat. that's their goal. Like, that's, you know, like I come from so many things. I just don't, you can't hurt it. you just can't. You just can't. Like, I get to enjoy 74 other people being awesome that all share a unique, because it is a unique hobby, right? Like, the number of people that keep fish in this world is not a lot compared to like all sorts of other hobbies that are out there. You can't ruin it. I wish more people would look at it that way. Like, I know some people get a lot more horrible people than I do, because I'm a tiny channel. I barely just broke 7,500 subscribers, which, like, yeah, that's kind of big in fish world, but that's tiny in the scope of YouTube. I am not even a speck of sand in the world of YouTube, right? I'm tiny. But you know what? On average, I see over 100 comments that are like, always make my day. Like, anytime I put out a video, within, it's the first like 72 hours or so, you typically see like 100-ish comments on my videos, just because of the number of views I get and interaction, blah, blah, all the science of YouTube. Who cares, right? But they're always all positive. I maybe get one negative comment like every 5 videos. How could I not smile, right? How can I not feel blessed or lucky? However you want to deem it. And I wish more people could find that silver lining in everything. I'm lucky. I'm lucky that I can do that. Especially during human malware, because it is a terrible time in the world for some people right now. And I'm lucky. It's true. Thanks to a lot of you. Because a lot of you folks that are in chat, like, I see your chat, your comments when you guys comment on videos. Some of you comment like every video. You people are the best. Like, every time I see comments from you folks, even if it's just like, I really like that video, or like, oh, that's a great lesson, or whatever it may be, makes my day. Every time makes my day. I could have days where like I've been super busy and like I barely get my video out. Right? On Saturday at my timing the way I want it. But every time, Saturday is like one of the best days of my week. Because come about like noon, the video's been out for a couple hours, and I'm gonna go have a little lunch with my lady, or like maybe I'm just like sitting with one of my puppies for a few minutes, thinking about like, okay, I got this much time, and then I gotta film this, and I gotta edit this, and I gotta do. Right? Like the way that my brain works on my scheduling. Always feel good. Always do. It's because of you folks. You folks are absolutely wonderful. And yes, fortunate is in there. I am definitely fortunate. Because of you guys. All right, I'm going to hit a couple questions. We're close to the end. But yeah, sorry. Went on a really long tangent there, but just that's how my brain works, man. Welcome to me. I'm a weirdo. Jersey guy hates angelfish. I can get it a lot. Like, I both love and hate angelfish. I love them because I grew up with them, and they're like really important to my family, because like my great grandmother used to breed them way, way, way back. But I hate angelfish only because I can never sex them. I'm so terrible at telling the difference between a female and a male angelfish without like seeing the breeding tube. I can't sex them at all. It drives me crazy, because usually I want to try to, get them to breed when I have them. Oh, man. Okay. I got one person with some Madakas. Hopefully they do very well. I hope so. They're great. There's a question. All right, so I'm Green Grove Aquatics. Is there a way to identify different mosses? LFS sold me guppy grass, but is clearly a moss. I double checked with LFS. They gave me the scientific name for guppy grass. It's clearly not. Well, I mean, guppy grass isn't a moss to begin with. So here's the problem. I don't typically do a lot of moss because I'm really bad at identifying them. Like, I can tell you the difference between, like, Christmas moss, flame moss, and Java moss. And there's a couple of, like, the really rare, unique mosses. But I couldn't tell you the difference between, like, Physidens fontanus and then another Physidens that looks very similar. I'm not that good with mosses. But that being said, there's, what is it? Google Lens is really good at identifying a lot of stuff. Man, moss is tough because a lot of them look really, really, really similar. But if you, like, guppy grass is a type of, right, it's really a weed. It's pretty obvious that it's not a moss. But, I mean, you're welcome to shoot me a picture. I can try and help you out. It's just like the same. And, like, for those, put it in chat real fast. If you guys do have questions that I didn't answer or I missed and you really want to know, I almost typed that so wrong. Jeez. You're welcome to email me. Usually takes me 3 to 4 days to get back to people right now just because of how crazy busy my work's been. But I will get back to you and I will answer you. So there you go. It's just bentley.pasco@gmail.com. Super simple. Okay. So in regards to the Brightwell media, actually that's getting a video here relatively soon. I'll give you the short and sweet. So we did that. I've been doing that long-term test with comparing the Zis as it stands, which comes with like K1 style media with plastic media that sits there and works in a fluidized bed, versus Brightwell's X, or Brightwater, not Brightwell. I did the mistake I didn't want to do. Brightwater, which I love the folks at Brightwater. They're absolutely wonderful. And the folks at Brightwell are too. What a coincidence. Both the Bright's in the name, both have wonderful people. It's like it lines up or something. If it wasn't obvious, the sponge has way more room for beneficial bacteria cultures. Way more. But we'll get into the data on that soon. Like I'm pretty much done with all the data points. I just have to shoot the video that gives the summary of what happened. Omar, I do have a Discord. It is specifically for members. But if you become a member once at the Pseudomagil level or higher, you're in there forever. So just keep that in mind. And part of that is just because I try to be really active when questions come in for me in my Discord, so much so that I will pay more attention to that than I do any of the other things that I leave open to people. And that can impact what little free time I have sometimes. But I do my best because those people, if they're members, I really want to give them a little extra love. And the Discord is there specifically for that. And it's a really small community, so it's not crazy active, but sometimes we get some really cool conversations going. Okay, so there's a couple cool questions. Man, I want to answer all these. Dang it, we're gonna run out of time. Omar, I'm sorry you had a terrible day. Hopefully tomorrow's better. I look at it this way. Every day is an opportunity for me to do something wonderful. That's why I wake up every day excited. Pretty sweet. Yeah, I think Google Lens is basically just the iPhone picture this. Yes, Cichlids 23. I think they're basically the same functionality. How do I know my angelfish has fin rot or just damage from bites in the alpha? Usually, fin rot will have kind of a whitish coloration at the edge of the fins. And it's the way that fin rot... So, like, bites will typically be in, like, a little area. You won't have a uniform going down the fin. Fin rot tends to affect the entire fin, or at least will like one big section will go away, where like little nips don't typically do too bad. So if it starts going kind of deep on the fin, that's where you worry. If all else fails, put a little bit of salt in the water. It helps them recover, and if you still see problems going, then start looking at potentially dosing an antibiotic to help. Okay, so DC Kyle, this is a really cool question. Do you have thoughts on how to figure out how much to scale up dosing, light, etc. as your plants grow? Think of it like fish, okay? Typically, you don't need to up your lights unless you keep your light really low to begin with, and it gets really, really dense. Fertilizer is like your fish food. And when you have more fish, you need more fish food, right? Very, very simple. So let's say I'm doing 1 pump of Easy Green every other day when I first plant my tank. You know, this is on that Bentley method where I try to spread my fertilizers out. I don't want to do it all on one day. I want a little bit in the water at all times. If my plants double in size, I probably want to move to having 1 pump every day instead of skipping that day. That way there's constantly, because there's more plant life, right? But then when I do a big trim, bring that back down, right? Because we don't want to over-fertilize. We're going to pull it down a little bit. So one of the things that I typically do is, like, let's say in my 40-gallon tank, right? I'll try to do typically 2 pumps every other day in my 40-gallon tank of Easy Green, as an example. Or there's a couple different ones that I've tried, but all basically follow the 1 pump per 10 gallons. When I start getting really dense plant growth, I'll start doing like 2 pumps, next day 1 pump, where I normally would do 0. Then 2 pumps on the day I normally would fertilize, 1 pump on the day I normally would not fertilize. So I'm just adding a small little extra dose. You don't really need a lot, but that little bit extra can be the difference between having the low growth still look nice and the low growth look really ugly. There's a slightly more like manicured approach we could take, and if you really want to go into that, feel free to email me and I'll dive a little deeper with you. But yeah. All right. Final question that I'm going to answer for the night is from Jeff Chambers. Actually, real quick, JT Zamora, Cremensis typically we want to be about 6 months to breed successfully, but I like them basically once the female is at about 2.5 to 3 inches. Okay, so that being said, Jeff Chambers, have you built Dean's fry station yet? No, I'm working on that with Dean, but he's been super busy. Basically, I'm trying to get a part list from him so I can put it together. And have you tried the Ziss brine blender? I have 2 of them. I'm only using 1 right now, just because I only have really space in my fish room for 1, but I bought 2 so that I would have a second one whenever I get to the point of moving to my garage, just to have it ahead of time, because stocking so weird and all the stuff with human malware. I just wanted to have the 2 now, so I just bought 2. I, for the most part, like it. I have a few small issues, and I'll probably do a review on it, and I'll complain about those issues accordingly. But overall, I think it's pretty nice. There's a couple things I like a lot about it. Namely, I like the quality of the plastic, and I like the size, the amount of water and amount of shrimp I can hatch versus the space it takes because of the way that it's been designed in that kind of blender style, right? It works really well, but it also has some problems because of that design. Yeah, I've seen that with the Brine Trip Direct, that the plastic is a little cheaper. Okay, so I'm gonna officially call the stream. I'm not technically gonna answer this question from the other Tiffany, but just a heads up, it's Dr. Black 66, I believe, is on now. So for those of you who like rolling like stream to stream, check him out. The other Tiffany, can you tell me or point me to a good video on how to use aquarium salt for a 6-gallon beta tank with live plants? I suspect my beta has an injury, but maybe the start of an infection. So here's my suggestion. It's not perfect. There are several really good beta channels out there. I would suggest Taylor, which is Simply Beta. She is absolutely wonderful. She has lots of great videos, not specifically just on betas, but she does have quite a lot of beta content. There's several other really good betta channels too that you can find, but I just like Taylor a lot, so check her out. She's awesome. Plus, she has a super cute baby. Just put that out there. So I look at, when I dose salt, I do it like this: 1 tablespoon per 20 gallons is like a booster dose, where I do that to kind of just give a little boost to make sure that if I suspect something's going wrong, I do that just to see if I see a perk up. And if I see a perk up in my fish, then maybe I'm going to look at dosing a little bit more. 1 tablespoon per 10 gallons is what I call a starting medicinal dose, which is to say I don't want to go too heavy. This is still light enough to where the plant should stay okay, but it's enough to where you can affect a fish in a medicinal manner and actually start attacking things like parasites and stuff like that. A full medicinal dose, which is something I would not do in plants, is 1 tablespoon per 5 gallons or more. Some fish can handle more than that. Some can handle like a tablespoon per gallon, which to me is a lot. I think a tablespoon per 5 gallons is the most I would ever dose, unless I was specifically dealing with a very hard water fish that could handle a lot of salt. Once you get to that like tablespoon per 5 gallons, you're going to start getting to a point of where that level of salt can affect your plants. So typically we want to do this in a kind of quarantine tank of some form. So if you're looking at like a 6-gallon tank, treat your dosages like a 5-gallon tank. So in the case of you would do like a half tablespoon is the full medicinal. A quarter tablespoon would be your light medicinal, etc. If you do need some extra info on that, the other Tiffany, feel free to email me. But yeah, just that's kind of how I look at it. Depending on what you're seeing in your fish would depend on where I would want to start. I would just say if you do that 1 tablespoon for 20 gallons and just see if you see a little tick up, that's a good start. Thank you to Candy Overhauls, most wonderful mod ever. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching. Have a fantastic night, and stay awesome. Also, smile. It's good for you. It's good for you. There's always something nice at the end of any given day. You just got to look for it. Take care.